Thank you very much, Auntie Violet, for that generous welcome to country. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bryce Wakefield and I'm the CEO of the Australian Institute of International Affairs. This is a very special year for us. As an institute, we were founded in 1933 nationally, but we were founded by independent branches which date their foundation back to the 1920s, some of them. Starting with New South Wales in 1924. So it's been a century of discussion and debate in a world that now I think needs more than ever discussion and debate in a civil fashion. The title of this year's conference is, of course, Facing Fragmentation. And I think recent events have shown that there's a lot of fragmentation around and that there's a lot of people shouting at each other and perhaps not listening. One of the principles that we at this institute hold dear is that we try to encourage disagreement, but we try to encourage disagreement in a civil way so that we can talk our differences out and come up with solutions, I guess, for problems on international affairs. One of the people who has been central to this institution for such a long time now is our next speaker. She is the National Vice President of the Australian Institute of International Affairs. We won't go too long into bios throughout this whole event because you have full bios in your programs, but I'd like to invite Zara Kimpton up to the podium to give her opening speech.
Thank you, Bryce. So on behalf of the Australian Institute of International Affairs, I'd like to welcome you all here today to this year's National Conference on the subject of Facing Fragmentation, Possibilities and Partnership in a Fragile World. I should start by saying that today, the 11th of November, is Remembrance Day, which marks the end of one of the most terrible wars that the world has ever known. War is a terrible thing, and where possible, we should pursue all the means possible to end conflict, bearing in mind that giving in to aggression can in fact sometimes be worse than the aggression itself. The AIIA National Conference is now a major highlight of the international relations calendar in this country. We have over 350 registrants across the events, all the events today, and there are speakers and delegates from over 50 countries. Many of you will also attend the gala dinner tonight, where the speaker will be Federal Treasurer Dr. Jim Chalmers, as well as our President's Breakfast tomorrow morning, which will be addressed by Dr. Shashi Tharoor, MP, member of India's Lok Sabha, and former UN Under-Secretary General on the topic, Are we again facing a bipolar world? As Bryce just said, last year marked the 90th anniversary of the AIIA as a national organisation. This year we celebrated the centenary of AIIA New South Wales, and next year will be the centenary of Victorian branch. These two branches were created as branches of Chatham House, and it then amalgamated in 1933 to make the Australian Institute of International Affairs. Chatham House itself was founded in London in the aftermath of the war that we are remembering today. As a forum for dialogue rather than war, the AIIA has continued this tradition ever since its foundation. We're pleased to welcome to the opening session two keynote speakers, the Honourable Simon Birmingham, Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, and Dr. Heather Smith, who is the National President of the AIIA. We also welcome all those speakers and panellists who will contribute to the other sessions over the course of the day. We also warmly welcome diplomatic representatives, including heads of mission from around the world. Many of our fellows are also in attendance today, and I'd particularly like to note John McCarthy, our former president, who's been a great supporter of this conference. We also have a group of New Colombo Plan alumni and members of the AIIA Japan Foundation Indo-Pacific Cooperation Network. We're particularly grateful to the Japan Foundation for its ongoing support for this network, We also welcome scholars from the Coral Bell School of the Asia Pacific at the ANU, University of Queensland, Griffith University, University of Canberra, and the ANU National Security College. And for the second year, we're pleased to see a group of 14 young members from AIIA Victoria who are attending the conference and associated events as part of a study tour to Canberra. And we have also 3 from AIIA South Australia. The AIIA is the only membership-based organisation in its field that has branches in all states and territory capitals, and they are all represented here today. Many of you will not know each other, but I do encourage you to mix as much as you can. This is an opportunity to create new networks and find new mentors. Today's conference also follows our series of masterclasses which took place yesterday at the Coral Bell School of Asia Pacific Affairs at the ANU, where about 100 of our younger members from around the country were privileged to hear and interact with a group of AIIA fellows and other collaborators. This was followed by a reception generously hosted by the Dutch ambassador, Adi Stoys-Bracken. Now to look at the world in which we live. I think it has come as a great shock to many of us in this country that Donald Trump has again been elected as president of the Western world's leading democracy, with his Republican Party also controlling both the Senate and the House of Representatives. When he left office in January 2021, just after the appalling events of January 6th, Trump's approval rating was 34%. As Paul Kelly wrote in The Australian last week, Donald Trump now has a mandate to remake America and shock the world. The editorial in last Thursday's Financial Review stated, Trump's capricious and self-interested decision-making comes with great geopolitical and economic risks. That is underlined by the prospect of Trump cutting a peace deal with Russian President Vladimir Putin that sells out and carves up Ukraine, and by the potential for a 60% tariff on all imports from China and a 10% tariff on imports from all other countries, including allies such as Australia. That would blow up the world trading system, counterproductively stoke domestic inflation, and severely damage growth and prosperity. Trump also has no plan to rein in the US budget deficit and debt spiral that, if unchecked, could jeopardize global financial system stability. America's global leadership has traditionally rested on the unique qualities of its political system. That system has usually enabled America to recover from setbacks, regenerate its leadership, and project its economic and military power globally. Trump's second coming represents the greatest challenge to belief in American exceptionalism, probably since the Great Depression, and at least since the end of the Vietnam War." End quote. Democracy is alive and well in America, but it is now a deeply divided country. We're told that the main reason for the defeat of the Democrats was the economy, and that people felt they were better off during Trump's first term. The strange thing is that the American economy is now performing well, and inflation is now down to about 2.4% after a 20% rise in prices over the past 4 years. However, many of Trump's supporters are based in the Rust Belt and rural states, where many young people are feeling left behind due to their jobs either moving offshore or being taken by illegal immigrants. They eagerly absorbed Trump's slogan that he would make America great again. The reality may hit home to them and the rest of America that it will be very hard for some of those jobs to come back. And I wonder whether they really want to slave away in factories or do some of the jobs that the migrants have been doing over recent years. Trump's policies may well be inflationary and will not reduce the national debt. However, young men, including both Black and Latino, were also unhappy at some of the DIE and somewhat woke policies that the Democrats support. This conference, of course, is not just about America and its place in the world, but there's no doubt that the world is looking at greater uncertainty due to Trump's unpredictability. Ukraine is about to embark on what will be another harsh winter, with power blackouts which may last up to 16 hours and will have terrible social consequences, especially for the elderly. Support for Ukraine is also becoming fragmented in the West, particularly amongst far-right parties in France and Germany, and now Trump in the US. It was terrible that Putin was able to walk into Crimea in 2014 as his first act of aggression towards Ukraine and actually get away with it. This will remain a source of unhappiness in Ukraine, but it is looking more and more likely that if the war is to end, then there will have to be some sort of compromise by Ukraine and its backers. At this stage, Ukraine simply does not have the resources to continue the fight for much longer unless the West increases its support. Then there is the question of possible NATO membership for Ukraine, which is controversial as it could draw existing members into a war with Russia that they're keen to avoid. The Ukraine war is dividing Europe, but if Ukraine is defeated, it will be a tragedy for Europe and the world. And speaking of Europe, its largest economy, Germany, is set to contract for a second year in a row, with its car exports to China now seriously depleted, and within Europe, it is now facing strong competition from cheap Chinese electric vehicles. And now its traffic light coalition government has just fallen after Chancellor Scholz sacked his finance minister. One of the most dangerous developments has been the development of what is now being described as the Dark Quad. Iran is supplying drones and ballistic missiles to Russia, and in turn Russia is helping Iran with its nuclear ambitions. Now North Korea is sending troops to Russia to help it fight the war in Ukraine. China is happy to support them all as it helps in its goal of diminishing the existing rules-based international order. Russia wants to develop a new world order. Putin recently hosted the annual BRICS summit in Kazan, which was attended by leaders of 36 countries, as well as the UN Secretary General. Many of these countries were from the Global South. Russia and China are both keen to help the Global South pursue its national interest while binding them to their own goals. At the same time, the situation in the Middle East is dire, with the ongoing wars in Gaza and Lebanon, as Israel tries to destroy Hamas and Hezbollah, while hoping the 101 hostages still held in Gaza will be released if they are alive. In the Indo-Pacific, the Quad, consisting of US, Japan, Australia and India, continues to be an important part of our strategic planning. Japan now sees Australia as a key partner. Those of you who attended our conference dinner last year will have heard former Japanese Prime Minister Taro Aso speak about Japan's willingness to join a possibly renamed AUKUS. It is also boosting defence ties with South Korea, despite the country's historical grievances. I'm looking forward to learning more about India's role in the world during this conference, as it effectively has its feet in the Western-driven Quad while maintaining a relationship with Russia, which Putin has described as unique. The Taiwan situation is also concerning for many, with China increasing its military operations near the island. However, there are divisions in this country about support for Taiwan, with former PM Paul Keating saying that Taiwan people are sitting on Chinese real estate. In spite of all the chaos in the world, it's also important to note that 2024 was also the year of elections. Almost half the world has voted or will vote in 2024. 64 countries, plus the European, had elections scheduled, and Japan even had one that wasn't scheduled. India also took the largest democratic exercise in the world, with over 900 million registered voters. Not all the elections that took place around the world could be what we would describe as fair and free. In this context, I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the late Colin Chapman, who died just a month ago. Those of you who read our weekly blog, Australian Outlook, will have read Colin's monthly columns this year on the elections taking place around the world, as well as his columns on the world's geopolitical challenges. Colin was a former president of AIIA New South Wales and also an AIIA fellow. He was a former journalist with the Times and the BBC in the UK, several ACP publications in Australia, and also deputy editor of the Australian newspaper. Colin made an enormous contribution to our analysis of what is both good and bad in the world. He certainly would have had plenty to say about Trump's re-election. And talking of Australian Outlook, I do recommend it to those of you who are not familiar with it. Everyone who signed up to this conference should automatically receive our weekly emails from now on. But if not, please register on the website or contact our office. These emails will also alert you to our Australia in the World podcast series, which was started by Darren Lim in conjunction with our former president, the late Alan Gyngell. Darren now hosts the series with invited guests who specialise in whatever international topic is currently important, and there are plenty of those at the moment. One of the most important elections in our region was the one held in Indonesia earlier this year for its president and every level of government. This time, Prabowo Subianto won on the first round, and he finally took office just a few weeks ago. Indonesia is now a stable democracy. We've had our differences over the years, but we look forward to working cooperatively with Indonesia and its ASEAN neighbours, particularly with a view to maintaining freedom of navigation across our vital trade routes. There's certainly plenty to talk about today in our panel discussions. Their topics have been carefully chosen to address many of the current issues we face. As I said last year, there are no easy solutions to the challenges the world is facing. It's important for us to hear all sides of debates. You may not agree with all the points of views expressed, but I hope that when the conference concludes, you'll have a greater understanding of the issues involved so that you can come to your own conclusions.